Thank you, Mino. So today I'm going to talk about, it's a new research that I've been working on since I finished here at MIT. And it's an exploration of what seems to me to be a neglected area of a neglected opportunity for economic development, in which it's not about that old style import substitution moving up the value chain, and it's not what came after, in a time in which people were advising countries to embrace their comparative advantages. The idea here is how do you pack more value into the very basic commodities that so many developing countries already produce. And it connects to what I learned from Judith in many different ways. The first one is that I'm presenting a draft, and I heard in different occasions Judith mentioned that, you know what, the published article is kind of too sanitized a version. You should go back and read the draft that this person wrote. That's much better. There's all these interesting details that got cut out. So I'm going to present the draft. That's on purpose. And it also, to me, it was a big surprise what I found in this research, or what came up in this research. And so surprising that for a long time I didn't think it was true. I think this cannot be happening. It cannot be the case. And that's something that I learned from her, to be attuned to this, and that have your antennas up to see and be sensitive to those surprises. And another thing is that it came up from being in the field. So I started to see this common thread, or the same phenomenon in different cases of things that I observed in the field doing research with Judith, a different project that I was working on with Richard Locke, and some consulting work that I had done for the Brazilian government before my PhD. And not many people see the value in starting a research and saying, I didn't know this existed, I didn't know that this was happening, and I learned it on the field. I've seen Judith say this to different audiences in which people are like, what? I mean, you didn't have a theory and a hypothesis and a lit review and everything else, and you just went there to check? I said, no, I kind of learned as I was going along, and it changed how I saw the world. And that's what happened to me in this research. And I could only do that because she helped prepare me to be able to see this kind of research opportunities. And so the first surprise that many people know, but I didn't know, is that commodities, even though are supposed to be undifferentiated, homogeneous goods, are anything but homogeneous and undifferentiated. So some sugarcane, for instance, I'm going to talk a lot about sugarcane. Some sugarcane varieties are very rich in sugar, and some sugarcane varieties are not so rich in sugar. They're rich in fiber and water and something else. When you study meatpacking and the beef and leather industry, some cows have very nice, fat, yummy meat, and others don't. And the part that caught my attention is the part of the hide and the leather, in which some animals have very well taken care skin or hide that produce very good leather, and others don't. And so that was the initial seed that planted and helped me see what came next. Which is that the puzzle, what's very puzzling, is that in some sectors and in some places, these commodities are sold based on weight. So you just weigh them up, and that's how they are commercialized, that's how they're traded. And that means that very important variables remain invisible to the trading partners. Nobody's paying attention to some very important, valuable, meaningful in monetary terms, variables of those commodities, and they're not taking account in those transactions. That also means that investment in those qualities, in upgrading those features, is also negligible or subpar or inefficient. That happens in some sectors, but then it doesn't happen in other sectors. There are in some places and some sectors you have producers and processors of these commodities adopt very sophisticated formulas to measure those features that count. And what I'm showing there is a little bit of the regulations of one of those systems. So you have a few of the formulas on how you measure how much sugar there is in sugar cane. And that's how sugarcane farmers get paid for the cane that they sell to the mills. So moving on this same example, in Brazil, until 1983, sugarcane was sold, farmers would sell their sugarcane to the mills based on weight. So the farmers would plant whichever cane was heaviest, not whichever cane had the most sugar. In 83, it was a heavily regulated sector. The government instituted a change that mandated now it's going to be payment based on quality, not payment based on weight. And this revolutionized the sector. You start to see a lot of investment, a lot of worker training, a lot of collective action by the farmers to monitor the mills and by the mills to keep the farmers on check. And what this chart shows, on the horizontal axis you have the years from 84 to 2003, and the vertical axis, the proportion of farmland planted with different types of sugarcane. So you see on the your left corner of the chart, you had two varieties that dominated. Everybody planted either the yellow one or the blue one. And that's pretty much it. That's what people would plant. And then as this new system kicked into place, you see people investing a lot in developing the varieties and adopting those varieties. Have early season sugarcane, late season cane, wet climate sugarcane, dry climate sugarcane, and for different types of terrain, for different types of uses. And you see a multiplication of types that goes along with research and development, technology, logistics, worker training to harvest the bottom of the cane that's richer in sugar than the top. The industry got transformed in part, and that's what I'm still, I'm making this as a clear assertion. I'm still backing this up with more evidence, but there's lots of indication that that's the case. And that's also interesting that in 1990, when the government deregulated the sector, the farms and the mills, it's like, we love this system so much, we don't want to let it go to waste. So they recreated it in private, the farmers and the mills recreated in private the institution that helped monitor and implement this quality payment system that the government had been running. And since then, the system has been evolving a lot. Instead of only paying for sugar, the farmers get paid for the ethanol that gets produced by the mills. And when I was doing initial fieldwork for this, I learned that the farmers were starting to negotiate the inclusion of the fiber in the cane that the mills burn to produce electricity. So they have a very close relationship mediated by this institution. What's puzzling is that, several interesting puzzles here. One of the big puzzles is that when I was doing fieldwork, and again prodded by Judith, well, what's the history behind this and how does this come about and what came before? I was looking at this old book in the New York Public Library from Sugarcane Report from the 1930s, in which people were already advocating for this change. So it took at least 50 years for something that they eventually, once they got into place, they loved. But it took something was preventing this the implementation of the system for 50 years. And then something got changed and it got put into place. And then I started to look, how does it happen in other countries? And you have some very large producers like China, Pakistan, several states in India that still pay cane based on weight. And they still complain, and there's all these remarks how this is inefficient and it's kind of stupid and it doesn't make any sense. And they still do it. And then we have other countries that have very different systems. And there's a lot of politics and how the resources get distributed and the revenues get distributed depending on the different systems. And this is not only about cane. It also happens in cattle, and the leather example that I gave in Brazil to this day, the farmers, the cattle ranchers don't get paid a dime for the quality of the hide in the cows that they sell. I learned when I was doing fieldwork for my dissertation, in Brazil there's a big cluster of charcoal pig iron production in the Amazon, and so I didn't know that charcoal was not all the same. Some charcoal it's fully carbonized, there's no pieces of wood in that. The size of the pieces of charcoal is adequate for production of pig iron, and in other ones it's not. There's lots of badly burned wood and lots of charcoal powder, and in one state in the Amazon, the mills buy the charcoal based on weight, by the truckload. And in the other ones, they are already implementing, so in the same country, same sector, 2 states, implementing a different way of paying for this for this commodity. And then I started to pay attention to this and talk to people. So that happens in coffee and in oil and in cocoa. And somebody told me about electricity. That's something that I not know a lot about. But somebody else said, oh, what about mineral water and olive oil? And it just seems to be everywhere. And then when I mentioned to Judith, well, you should take a look, and I had read some time ago, and then I just got a new copy for myself, of what to think about co-ops in Bolivia, and how the members of the co-ops have a fight over the method of payment with the managers of the co-ops and to who they sell the products to. And pushing this a little bit further direction, it's true that technology is important. It's much easier to measure weight than to measure quality. But there are many cases in which technology does not seem to be a hurdle. I mean, to visually inspect the quality of the hide in an animal, it's not a big technological, it doesn't require lots of sophistication. And to measure the amount of sugar in cane, you need a kitchen. You can put it in the food processor, boil it in a pot, and see how much sugar is left. It seems that the crucial element in this story is this institution that mediates the conflicts between the producers and the processors. And this connects to the research we're doing in Brazil with Roberto and Mansueto, and when I was studying the Brazilian prosecutors, in which we're studying the resolution to these types of conflicts, the conflicts between labor and management, the conflicts between environmental standards and economic performance. And we started to look at some of these conflicts within supply chains, but we didn't get far enough into that line. So that's something that I'm using what I learned from that research to push this further. And I'm going to end with a few of the questions that come up into this, and then I'm exploring further on how this institution that seem to, at the same time, promote cooperation between producers and processors to upgrade the joint output, but also helps mediate their division of the proceeds. What do they look like? What do these institutions look like? How do they vary? Why do they vary across sectors and within sectors and across countries and within countries? Why do they exist in some places but not in others? What prevents adoption? And how are these obstacles eventually or sometimes removed? And what kind of results they generate? And the kind of research, I'm going to talk a little bit now, just my last point, some of the resources that I bring to this and connecting back to what I learned from Judith. I have two pictures that those who are not students will not understand, so I'm going to explain. One is her favorite classroom, 4144, and that's where I learn a lot of what I do. And the other one is where you collect your papers with all the comments, which is her gas meter box outside her house. So if you want to get the comments, that's where the paper is at odd hours, fully marked with all these insightful, provocative, interesting comments pushing you to new directions. So I hope to benefit from that a lot in the future. Thank you.